I think sprinting in Fortnite is overrated. Now, the tactical sprint increases your movement speed by 40%, and your jump height while sprinting also increases by 20%, but sprinting actually has three very big problems that repeatedly cause players to die. First, you can't shoot while sprinting. Now, I know this is very obvious, and you probably know this already, but the problem is actually more that you don't even have your gun pulled out whilst you're sprinting. This means that when you stop sprinting, there's then a pull-out delay on your weapon before you can shoot. For most shotguns, this is around 300 milliseconds or 0.3 seconds, which is roughly the same as my reaction time, which can easily leave you in a bad spot if you accidentally sprint into another player who already has their weapon out, as you won't be able to damage them and they can damage you. The second issue is that you can't build while sprinting. Now, this issue can be overcome, which we'll come to later, but in order to build while sprinting, you must sprint and then build, which resets you to a default movement speed, and then you kind of repeat the cycle. Sprinting, building, sprinting, building. Now, since building has no pull-out time, thank God, you can go straight into building from sprinting, so this isn't as bad as, say, not being able to shoot, but for the most part, sprinting will leave you completely exposed while rotating. The third issue is the biggest though, and what I like to call the Peterbot effect. Now, by watching incredibly mechanical players like Peterbot play, people just try to replicate this. A lot of players think that mechanical speed is just the #1 most important factor in becoming a good fighter, and I've actually already done a full video breaking down how this isn't really the case whatsoever. Take this video I found on Reddit as a prime example of this player just asking how he can improve his fighting skill, and in his words he said, "Why am I so ass at fighting?" Here the player is just trying to be fast. He's trying to be as fast as possible with no real consideration for angles, peaks, crosshair placement, or really any of the good fundamentals of being a good fighter. And if you look closely, sprinting only makes that problem worse. Sprinting speeds up everything that you do, whilst at the same time not allowing you to shoot or build. Worst of all, this fast but messy playstyle makes it almost impossible to watch your opponent and predict what they're actually going to do, which means you have no idea what they're going to do, and they could probably just sit and watch you trying to just flail around trying to build up. Now, if you're about to say how all of the best players, they sprint all the time in their fights, they're so good, first, take a look at these examples and tell me where all of this sprinting is occurring in these fights. The vast majority of fights, even at the pro level, have very little or no sprinting whatsoever. I actually believe that the vast majority of players would immediately become better fighters by only sprinting in a very few scenarios. So, what are those? The first is what I call closing the gap. Now, most fights start off by two players somewhat medium distance from each other, shooting each other with assault rifles, such as this fight from Rapid right here, where he manages to crack the opponent's shield. Now, since the other player has elevated himself, he's up a few layers. If Rapid was just to build, he would ramp up relatively slowly. So instead, he places a ramp and then sprint slides, and as he slides, he places a bunch of floors. Now, sprint sliding maintains your momentum speed from when you were sprinting, but allows you to build. Therefore, he's easily able to close the gap between him and the opponent and then finish the fight out relatively quickly. This is important because this gives the opponent less time to heal. However, you can also continually pressure the opponent by doing this too. Here in this clip, Muzz beams another player and then sprint slides towards him whilst the other player boxes up. However, because he's now sprint sliding, he keeps that increased movement speed, which allows him to continually spray the other player and pressure him, again preventing this player from healing, and in this case just killing them. But the third way this is super useful for when closing the gap is actually just reloading. In this clip, Koyota is spraying a player that's quite far away, but since he's used the majority of his ammo, he can then sprint, slide, and reload, which both allows him to move quickly to get closer to the opponent to finish off the fight, whilst also reloading that weapon. And in this particular situation, it was really important because his shotgun ran out of ammo, and when he got into the box, he used the final part of his AR just to finish this fight off. So had he not reloaded here, he probably would have actually died. So by sprint sliding to close the gap between you and an opponent, you can either build, spray them to keep the pressure up, or reload your weapons to ensure you can box fight them, all whilst moving 40% faster. Now, once you've caught up with the opponent, this is where most players will make the biggest amount of mistakes when it comes to sprinting, and that's when you're trying to change angles in a box fight. Just remember, there is that pull-out delay on your weapon, so if you're caught sprinting for too long in this close proximity, it's very easy for an opponent just to hit you with a big pump shot, then that just turns the entire fight around. So when changing angles, you have to be really careful to do exactly what Swizzy does here. He wants to drop down to start pressuring the wall to his left, and simply just by sprinting for half a second, this increases his movement speed, which allows him to drop a little faster, pull out his pickaxe, and then start pressuring the wall all that little bit quicker. Now, you may not think this tiny time save is very important, but you've got to remember this opponent is weak and he's trying to pop a mini, which takes 2 seconds. And if you save half a second by sprinting, this just gives the opponent less time to heal, and in this case allowed Swizzy just to beam him. Muzz does the exact same thing in this clip, where he sees the opponent make another box, so he places a ramp and then sprint jumps off of this, and as he's flying with this increased movement speed, he can then spray the wall to weaken it. This then allows allows him to do a really easy shotgun wall replace and then finish off this player very quickly. Here's a side-by-side comparison. On the left, him just walking, and on the right, him doing a small sprint jump. And you can see just how much more pressure you can apply whilst you're sprinting. Now, the main theme of these and the other clip that I'm showing on screen right now is that they're not just sprinting up in the open. It's a small sprint jump just to ensure you can change angles very quickly, and by the time they've landed, they've already got their AR, shotgun, or pickaxe out. On top of changing angles, one thing that sprinting allows you to do is, as I mentioned earlier, jump 20% higher. Now, the most common use of this is simply just to sprint jump off of a cone outside of a box if you're in a tricky situation like Muzz does here. But this increased movement speed also allows you to do side jumps just from on top of cones, as you can see Peterbot do here, which allows him to elevate one layer up and completely piece up the other player. But one of the best uses for sprint jumping is to take advantage of Fortnite's desync. Now, in an online game, what you see on your screen may not be exactly what the other players see on their screen, and that may differ slightly from what the server sees as well. Now, what this means is in your screen, you may be in a good peak, such as this clip here, and even in replay mode, you can see that I'm hidden behind this wall, but on the opponent's screen, I may have been visible when I confirmed this edit. This is because on my screen, I was in this correct position, hiding behind the wall, but on his screen, I was slightly delayed, which meant I was still visible to the right side of the edit, meaning he could shoot me, which was very annoying. Now, as you notice, I was standing on the right-hand side of the wall and walking to the left while editing, which meant that due to the slight delay and desync, that my character was still visible. However, had I confirmed the edit whilst I was on the left of the wall and I was walking to the right, I could use desync to my advantage. Because my player would be slightly delayed, I would be able to see the opponent before they would be able to see me, and this is called peeker's advantage. So if you always remember that moving into an edit or into a peak will always give you the peeker's advantage, sprinting or sprint jumping into a peak will give you an even bigger advantage because you're moving faster, which means on the other player's screen, the character will be even further behind. This gives you a larger window of time to hit them, whereas they have the smaller chance to hit you. So that's why when a player is on the other side of a wall, making an edit and going for a shot isn't always the best play, because oftentimes you could just sprint jump round to the other side and hit them way before they'd be able to hit you. You can also just do a short sprint followed by a jump whilst using Flowberry Fizz just to continually change up angles, and this is actually how the vast majority of high ground retakes are done in game. Notice in this clip by Peterbot how he first does a sprint jump with Fizz underneath the player to try and get a shot around the back of them, which in this case didn't work, but this is actually something he does a ton, and it's a really good way to confuse the opponent and get a shot off on them. The Fizz then runs out and he does another sprinting jump, but rather than going for a shot, he places a high wall and catches himself on two ramps, which allows him to easily take height and then piece out the other player and win the fight from there. One of the most obvious use cases for sprinting though is just to be a rat and just to run away. You can see in this fight that Rapid does not use sprint once during this entire fight where he's killing a, maybe not so good player, but the second he hears a third party come in, he knows he's in a box that none of it is his and he needs to escape and get out. So he immediately sprints, which allows him to get out of the box faster, which then gives him space to work with in this next fight. You can also just like run about in boxes, just making it really difficult for you to hit, which is really funny, but I mean, you also just can't shoot back at that time either. So, it's a funny play that you can make just to kind of try and grief people, but yeah, you're probably just going to die doing it. This has mainly been focused around fighting. And of course, if you're in early game, you want to sprint to get some loot, you want to rotate a little bit, you need to go further, you're in storm, you need to get out. Sprint. But despite all of the things that I've just said here, sprinting in fights is still very overrated. The vast majority of people sprint far too much, and this makes it incredibly difficult to actually keep your eyes on the opponent and then create counterplays to this. If you narrow it down to just the things we've talked about here and a couple other plays that I'm sure you'll be able to think of, I guarantee your fighting will get infinitely better by sprinting less. Now, if you want to understand why fast mechanics are overrated, you can click this video on screen right now.